Hi, my name is Jana Thomas, and I am a senior safety consultant and a certified workplace violence specialist with Spotlight Solutions. Today, we're here to just talk about the California Senate Bill 553. I'm doing this as a one-year review. The bill went into place, the law went into place on January 1st of 2024. So I thought this would be a good time to circle back around to see where people's programs are and get ready for our annual trainings. This law came into place. It's for the workplace violence prevention in general industry. So just to start off on a recap, so California Senate Bill 553 on September 20th of 23, Governor Newsom signed Senate bill into law, requiring California employees to take additional steps to prevent and respond to workplace violence. The Senate bill added a section to 6401.9 to the California labor law, and this again was effective on July 1st of 2024. The interesting part of this law is that the law came into place actually before the standard through Cal OSHA. So I'm just going to review where we stand now. So as of right now, Cal OSHA is still working through the process of what this standard is actually going to look like that they are going to enforce. So as of today, Cal OSHA is required to propose a workplace violence prevention standard by the end of this year. So by the end of December, we should know what their requirements are going to be. And I anticipate there being some changes to this law that will be coming up. It has been adopted by the Cal OSHA Standard Board by that date of December 31st, 2026. So we will have that year to come in and have everything adopted and be ready. At that time is when Cal OSHA is going to start enforcing this law, which will include issuing citations and penalties for anyone that's in noncompliance. So employers must immediately report any serious injury or illness and death due to workplace violence to Cal OSHA during that time and in the interim. So who does the Senate bill actually pertain to? This pertains to all employees, employers, places of employment, and employer-provided housing. And there are a few exemptions here. So facilities that are covered by and comply with Section 3342 of Title 8 of the California Code of Regulations, facilities operated by the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, law enforcement agencies, teleworking employees working from a location that is not under the control of the employer, employers not accessible to the public that have less than 10 employees present at a given time and comply with Section 3203 of Title 8 of the California Code of Regulations. So just wanted to address what were the program requirements. What are the program requirements as of today? And again, we are probably going to be changing some of this once Cal OSHA makes their regulation. So employers must have a written workplace prevention plan. Employers must have procedures in place to evaluate and correct hazards and threats. Employers must maintain a violent incident log and have a system for incident investigations in place. Employers need to provide effective training to their employees, and employers must maintain records of all workplace violence incidences and investigations that do come about. So with that, I wanted to talk about the training. So many people that have implemented this probably over the summer of last year are now coming to the point where we're going to have that annual training coming up. So the requirements for workplace violence prevention training are the following. That you have to do an initial training when workplace violence plan is first implemented. So that should have taken place last year. Then you're going to have your new hire trainings. So as people are coming on board, they should be receiving this training as well. And now you're going to be due for that annual refresher training. So this should be the first refresher training that you have. When a new or previously unrecognized workplace violence hazard has been discovered and changes are made to the plan, again, there will be an additional training that would be needed. So the content of this training needs to include the workplace violence prevention plan that was developed, outline definitions that are outlined in Labor Code 6401.9, how to report workplace violence incidents and identify what the threats are, workplace violence hazards specific to the employee's jobs, and that violent incident log and record keeping. So now just to touch on the prevention plan itself, again, this should have been put into play about a year ago now. So in there, you must state that employers have zero tolerance for any form of workplace violence, and they have implemented this workplace violence prevention plan as a proactive measure to prevent violent incidences from actually occurring. Other things that need to be inside of this prevention plan, it needs to be accessible to all of your employees at no cost, and employees need to be shown where that plan is retained. So if you have electronic copies, they need to know where exactly that is. If you have hard copies as well, they need to know where those are as well. All employees are encouraged to contribute to the evolving development and implementation of the plan. So this gets really tricky. How can we involve all of our employees into this type of plan? One method I think that is very useful is to create a workplace violence survey that you could send out to your employees, and they can actually chime in on their different departments as to what they feel could be different types of hazards. And it may be actually eye-opening for you to see that as well as an employer. You need to identify, evaluate, determine corrective measures to prevent workplace violence. Participate in quarterly safety meetings. So that's very easy. You can have a select group of people participating in these quarterly meetings, and they'll evaluate workplace violence related concerns and hazards during those meetings. We're going to assist in designating and implementing training and reporting and investigating workplace violence incidences. So there's different aspects that you can bring your employees into play to help the development of this plan. So I just wanted to touch on some of the definitions that are specific to the Labor Code 6401.9. So these do need to be put into your plan, as well as some other definitions, but I just wanted to point out a few things because they're very specific. So this is defining workplace violence as any act of threat of violence that occurs in a place of employment. This does not include lawful acts of self-defense of others or defense of others. So the workplace violence includes, but is not limited to, the threat or use of physical force against an employee that results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, psychological trauma, or stress, regardless of whether the employee sustains an injury. So this is where it gets a little bit interesting. This brings into play more of that workplace bullying, the workplace harassment. You're getting into that psychological trauma that isn't as obvious as the physical trauma when you're looking at these workplace violence programs. But this is covered under this California law, so you need to make sure that is in there. In addition, it is referring to an incident involving a threat or use of a firearm or other dangerous weapon, including the use of common objects as weapons, regardless of whether the employee sustains an injury. So again, I encourage you, have your employees look around their work area, think outside the box. What could actually be a weapon? I mean, a stapler could be a weapon. It's just a common object that you could cause injury with. So that something as simple as that could be considered a weapon under this category. And then additionally, they need to follow one of the 4 workplace violence types, which I will review momentarily. So definition of a threat. So any verbal or written statement, including but not limited to text, electronic messages, social media messages, and other online posts, or any behavioral or physical conduct that conveys the intent or that is reasonably perceived to convey an intent to cause physical harm or to place someone in fear of physical harm, and that serves as no legitimate purpose. So this gets really tricky for an employer. Now with all of the technology that we have, all of that is blanketed under this law. So you need to be aware of what social media posts might be going on or online posts that are pertaining to work. So it gets a little tricky to figure out where that line is as to where you're going to be under this umbrella. But I feel like you take more caution than less, and you do address these instances under this law as well. And then just identifying work area. So that's just simply any place where a person or people are working for an employer. So this can include, but is not limited to, the office, a satellite work area, or a field work area. So just a review is, again, I mentioned the types of workplace violence. These are also additional definitions that do need to be outlined within your plan. So we have type 1 violence, and this is an act of people that have no affiliation with the workplace but enter to commit a robbery or another crime. So we typically see these things with like taxi drivers or convenience stores, any type of area that might have, money that's there. They're looking for the theft. Nearly 80% of all workplace homicides do fall into this category. And again, that motive is typically a theft motive. Usually people that are doing these types of crimes do show up with a weapon, and this does increase the chances of the victim being killed or hurt. So occupational groups, just a few that go over this. You could have taxi drivers, late night retail or gas station clerks, those who work in isolated or dangerous neighborhoods, and those who carry or have cash or access to cash are pretty much a target of being part of this type 1 violence type. Type 2 is a violence directed at employees by customers, clients, patients, students, inmates, and others from whom an organization provides a service. So this could be something that is happening at work. And typical types of occupation could be police officers, correctional officers, security guard, mental health workers, school teachers, anything that is applying that service to somebody can fall under this type 2 category. So often you can get violent reactions if you have an unhappy customer or client. It could trigger an argument, and that anger could lead to a workplace violence situation. Or a denial of service that you're going to do for somebody could also lead to something in this category. Type 3 is the one I think we all kind of think about. So it's that violence against coworkers, supervisors, managers, or past or present employees. So this is the one I think that readily comes to mind when we think about workplace violence. We think about the disgruntled worker that was terminated, coming back and going after the supervisor or going after the company. This is the one I think that most people are more familiar with. So we kind of have our radars up as to what we're looking for. The last type of workplace violence, I think, is one a lot of people actually don't think about. So this is a violent act in the workplace that someone who doesn't work there but has a personal relationship with an employee. So this could be an abusive spouse, a domestic partner, something along that line where something in their personal life is bringing them into a facility. So this is where I feel we really need to make sure that our employees are comfortable, talking to people at our or talking with HR or talking in confidence that someone, if they put a restraining order, perhaps they're having a really bad custody battle. These are things that an employee needs to feel comfortable being able to talk to somebody at the company just so they can put up some sort of a red flag if they do see someone come in. So for instance, if, my husband, I've been married to him for 10 years, I've been working for my company for 5 years. I don't talk about my personal life at work, so perhaps they don't know what's going on in my home life. And now all of a sudden I have a restraining order on him. So the next couple of days, my husband that everybody's known for 5 years is this great guy is walking in saying that, hey, I'm bringing lunch to her. And the person at the front desk has no idea that there is turmoil going on at home that could cause a risk. Right there, that's somebody very easily getting into the door. And that's just one example of how this personal life, work-life balance can come into play when we're talking about a workplace violence prevention program. So now I want to talk about workplace violence, job-specific hazards, and a little bit about risk evaluations. So this is kind of when you're building that initial program. So again, many of you have hopefully done this by now, but in case you're missing some of these parts, or some of you that need to develop this, especially before we get to the end of the year, the specific hazards that need to be addressed for a specific job. You need to know what the specific hazard is. The employee's job title needs to be listed out, corrective measures the employer has implemented, how to seek assistance to prevent or respond to workplace violence, and then strategies to avoid physical harm. Again, this area, I think, is where those workplace surveys will really come in handy too, because you may not know all of this information and what those specific hazards are to a particular job. So when you're doing this risk evaluation, things that you're really want to consider. You want to look at the workplace for existing potential hazards for workplace violence, procedures and operations, review your employee records, review past OSHA 300 if you're required to have one. You can do screening surveys again, conduct a workplace security analysis. Take the time to really get to know the whole facility and the outside of the facility to determine what could be some sort of a gap in that workplace situation. So a workplace security analysis, other things that you would want to, attribute into this. You want to analyze prior incidences, identify jobs and facility locations with the greatest risk. And again, this includes those outside areas. This includes garage areas. Those are still work areas. If something happens in them, it is going to fall under this law. So you want to document high types of risk factors. So types of members and clients. It could be physical factors, isolation and egress restrictions, perhaps lighting, communication devices, easily accessible unsecured spaces, area where previous security problems may have arose. And it could be even something. An example could be this construction going on at your facility. So there's a large dumpster over in the parking lot that's very close and taking up some of the parking spaces. That could actually be a good place for somebody to hide. So they could hide behind it, waiting for somebody to come out of work. And it's a very easy area. It's a large object that somebody can do that. So when you're doing these security analysis, you really need to think outside the box and put yourself in the mindset, where could I hide, or where could somebody else be that they could, physically get to me, make all of these observations on the outside and the inside of your work facility. So then lastly, I just want to touch on the required incident log and the record keeping and what those requirements look like. So the incident log, every workplace violence incident requires a violent incident log entry. So the violent incident log will complete the workplace violence program administrator. They'll be the ones to complete it. And this is all the information that needs to be on that log if you have it developed. You need to have the date, time of the incident, identify the workplace violence type that we just talked about. And again, those should be defined in your workplace violence plan. The detailed incident description, classification of who committed the violence, so client, family, stranger, classification of circumstances at the time of the incident, and classification of where the incident occurred at the workplace. Again, inside of this, you should not be having specific names listed on the violent incident log document. This is a document that other employees can access, so you should not have personal information or somebody's name. It's just classifying if it was a stranger, a family, a client, an employee. That's all that should be in there. Again, we need to identify the type of incident, the consequences for that incident, and then documentation of the person completing the log. So as far as record keeping, employers must maintain the following: the records of hazardous identification, evaluation and correction, and those must be kept for a minimum of 5 years. Those violent incident logs need to be kept for a minimum of 5 years, and then the training records for a minimum of 1 year. The records are required to be available to employees, representatives upon request for examination and copying within 15 calendar days of a request. Employers will need to specify how these requests can be made. So that's going to be on your part, is to tell how you're going to have your employees actually make these requests. But again, this is why there can be no personal identifying information on these logs. And that wraps up the review of the California Senate bill. Are there any questions that I can answer? Okay, well, with that, I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thank you.